All right, so we're going to talk about Flutter for web and other stuff that's happened in the Flutter Dart world over the last 6 months. So we're looking at Google I/O in May up until the latest announcement that came out today. My name is Rona Kilmer, and I am a co-founder of a startup out of Denver called Redio. Our mission is to take the complexity out of endurance training. And we do that through custom dynamic training plans that we offer up through an app. Our app is iOS and Android, and it was built in Flutter. We've spent the last year working with Flutter. Primarily, I've been working with Flutter, and my partner has handled all of the back-end work with GCP using Go and a plethora of cloud services. You can follow us. You can follow me. I'm at RKUnboxed on Twitter. Everything else is Redio. I tweet a lot about Flutter. If you're interested in endurance training, then follow Redio. We are going to, actually, first, I want to tell you a little bit about my development experience because it's kind of important here as we get into Flutter. I've spent the last 20 years building web apps. My experience was primarily in front-end development. I started as a designer, and then I turned into front-end developer, meaning HTML, CSS, and JavaScript primarily. And then the last couple of years before founding Redio, I was in management, so I wasn't touching any code. I had zero experience doing any mobile development. I did responsive web design, but that does not count. That's not really mobile development, no native code. So I came into Flutter, came into Redio thinking, okay, we have to build this app. How are we going to do it? Am I going to have to learn Swift and Kotlin? Like, that's a lot. And since I was a front-end developer, I obviously tried React Native. But I wasn't really happy with that. And my partner really pushed me to look at Flutter again. I had looked at Flutter like a year before that, and it wasn't really there yet. But I took another look, and this was back in September of last year, of 2018. And I jumped in, and it took me a couple of months to build something really quick. It was easy to get started with Dart, and I had this app that ran in both platforms. And I haven't looked back ever since. And I think that says a lot about Flutter. It says a lot about the documentation, and it says a lot about the community. The community is the most welcoming, helpful community I've ever been a part of. I cannot recommend it more highly. They've been really good about like keeping out any toxic stuff. It's a wonderful place to learn something. So if you're thinking about jumping into Flutter development, this is a great community. So we're going to talk a lot about Flutter for web. Then we're also going to talk about just general Flutter, which goes across all Flutter. And then there's some Dart updates that have happened in the last 6 months. And then I want to touch briefly on the predictions that I see for Flutter. Take them or leave them. I just have some ideas on where I think it's going to go. And then I'll leave you with some resources if you want to get started. And some of the things that I reference in the deck will also be listed there. All right, so it's important to know that Flutter for Web started out as Hummingbird. It was actually marketed as Hummingbird for a little while. Some of you might know that. If you don't know it, it's important to know it because you might still see it referred to as Hummingbird in some older articles and stuff like that. When they're mentioning Hummingbird, they're talking about Flutter for Web. I think eventually, as Flutter expands to all these different platforms, it's just going to be Flutter. But for now, we're still trying to figure out like how do you build stuff for Flutter for Web versus Flutter for mobile. So we're still distinguishing that, but I have a feeling eventually, once it's really mature across all the platforms, it's going to be just Flutter. This, Flutter all the things, is in reference to all the places where Flutter is running today. iOS and Android are production ready. These other platforms are in active development. We obviously have Linux, Mac OS, and Windows and Chrome OS, all for desktop development. We have the web, obviously, we're going to talk about that. And then I don't know if you knew this, but there's also a Raspberry Pi runner, so you can run Flutter on Raspberry Pi. There's also a whole bunch of rumors going around about Fuchsia and what that means, and Flutter is absolutely going to run on Fuchsia. But we don't know a whole lot about Fuchsia yet. It's a new operating system that Google is developing, and the idea, my understanding of it, is to make it small enough and fast enough and lightweight enough to power Internet of Things. And if they get that right, and then you put Flutter in there, Flutter's going to be literally everywhere. So the big announcement in May at Google I/O is that Flutter for Web was released as a technical preview. It was released as, it came out as a fork of the master of the Flutter repo. So it was a separate package. It was Flutter_web instead of Flutter. This was a pain in the neck a little bit. It let you play with it, but it didn't allow you to use any packages. Your dependencies all had dependencies on Flutter, not Flutter Web. So you had to, if you wanted to use packages, you had to go in and change their dependencies. So it was a mess. But just recently in 1.9, they merged back in the Flutter for Web branch. So now it's all in one repo, which means everything's Flutter, which means all the packages you should be able to import them without any problem. The way that Flutter for Web works. Basically, Dart is compiled down into HTML and CSS, the UI part, and it will fall back to Canvas if the HTML and CSS fidelity is not high enough. If they're not getting it to look and feel correct, then they'll fall back to Canvas. And here's a tech stack. We're going to compare Flutter for Web with the Flutter for iOS and Android. So the idea here is that you write Flutter code, it runs in the Flutter framework, and it works everywhere. You only write your code once. That's the big benefit. So all of these two layers are exactly the same. Doesn't matter where you're running it. This is where the differences come in. So Flutter for Web has a Flutter web engine, and Flutter for iOS and Android has a C++ Flutter engine. The engine is where the conversion to the HTML and CSS happens. Then we go to the Dart to JS compiler because we've still got logic that needs to run. So that's where the remaining Dart gets turned into JavaScript. Then obviously the browser is running our HTML, CSS, and JavaScript that's now been compiled. And obviously your browser is living on some hardware. For iOS, you've got the engine, which is, let's see, what's that doing? Yeah, the engine is converting it into the machine code, which is gets you your native executable, which then gets run on the hardware, whether it's iOS or Android. But really everything from green on down is kind of invisible to you as a developer. The only thing you need to know is what build command do I run to get an iOS build? What do I run to get an Android build? What do I run to get the web build? All right, so here's the good parts of Flutter for Web. For the most part, widgets just work. If they worked in your mobile app, they'll work in the web app. There are some exceptions. You're going to need to learn a couple new widgets that are specific to desktop, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. But the ones that exist today that you're using in mobile should just work. Responsive web is already basically built into Flutter. This deck is built in Flutter for Web, and I'll show you. I can undo it here. And I just put some pretty basic responsive stuff in to get the text and stuff to resize. Nothing fancy, but this was already in place for mobile. It's basically a media query widget, and you need that for mobile anyway. You got to know if the phone's in landscape or horizontal, and you have to know if it's an iPad or a phone just to get sizing dimensions. So that's already built in, ready to go. The Dart to JS compiler, I know when I heard about them converting Dart to JavaScript, I kind of got itchy as a front-end developer, and I thought, how are they going to do that? I don't know. But the Dart to JS compiler has been around for a long time. They created it for Dartium back in the day, and it's really mature. It's been solidly vetted, so I don't have any concerns about that anymore. And then Dart DevTools, if you're using them in mobile, they also have a browser version. Where you can do your widget inspector, all that good stuff. If you're building for the web, you have the same tools. So these are some good to know widgets for your web app. The raw keyboard listener, I'll show you some code here. Nothing too crazy. Some of these widgets were discussed, and some of the code that we're going to look at in a bit were discussed in Google I/O presentations, so you can find the links to those at the bottom of these, at the bottom of the dialogues here. So raw keyboard listener is a widget you're going to want to use if you care about listening for keyboard events. You are going to need the services package to have things like the raw key down event, which we're going to talk about here. If you don't have that, then you can't really pay attention to events. So grab the services. You're going to need to, in this case, this example is for closing a dialogue. So you might pop up a dialogue, and then you might want to cancel it by hitting the backspace button. That's what this example is for. So we have to create a focus node right here. And the focus node is basically a change notifier, and it allows widgets to listen for events. So we create the focus node. We're going to return our raw keyboard listener right here. We pass in that focus node, and then it has an onKey method here. And this onKey is where we're going to determine, is this the key we care about, and what are we going to do with it? So when a key is pressed, we want to check, is it a key down event? It could be a key up event. I don't know. What do you care about? In this case, they care about a key down event. And does the event have a logical key ID of keycode.backspace? Now, this logical key is a property that they created that maps the values of the keyboard keys to their functionality, not their location. So if you use logical key, and you've got international users, then you're safe. So if, like in the English keyboard, you might have the delete key on the top right, but in an Arabic keyboard, it might be on the top left. You don't have to worry about that with logical key. It knows you're looking for the backspace button regardless of where it is. And so if we have a match, if it's a key down and it's the backspace key, go ahead and pop the navigator and it will close the dialog. So easy peasy. And I have this set up on these guys down here. You don't really see so you can see it working with the keyboard. Mouse region is what you'll want to use for hover effects. Got one built in right here. This one's super easy. It's basically just a widget that gives you on-enter and on-exit callbacks. A super simple example just shows you printing hover on and printing hover off. And for this example, I'm just changing this style that's attached to the text widget when you hover over it. The selectable widget is interesting because you might expect that text would be selectable on an HTML page. Sometimes it's not with Flutter. So you have to know about how to select text. See, I can't select it. This text I can select because I put it in a selectable text widget. Again, this is another super simple widget. You need the dart.html or Dart HTML package to do the example here. It's basically a text widget, but it has the on tap callback here. So if somebody taps on it, you don't have to use this, it's optional. If somebody taps on it, you can do whatever you want. In this case, I have them opening a URL. So this is basically how you would do an href. It's one of the ways. There's a couple different ways. But if you want to link in your text, you could use the selectable text widget and use window.open on the on tap callback. And this is specifying that it's going to open in a new tab. So Flutter for web is definitely still a work in progress. There's no stateful hot reload. If you've been doing any Flutter development for mobile, then you probably love the stateful hot reload as much as I do. And I dearly miss it when I'm doing anything in Flutter for web. They know how important it is. It's a huge selling point for Flutter. So my understanding is that they're working really hard to get it to work with Flutter for web. You still need to optimize. I wouldn't expect that you can take a mobile app and just port it over to Flutter for web and have it be great. It'll probably work, but there's still a number of things you're going to need to do, like the widgets I just showed you, to optimize it for web. There are some browser UI differences. For instance, it's kind of hard to see with the projector, but this arrow in my little navigator buttons here is in the center of a circle. If I open this in Firefox, that little icon is just a little bit off center. I don't know how to fix that. I'm used to going into HTML and CSS and being able to tweak things to death if I needed to, and I can't do it here. So I assume they're going to be fixing that, but there's little things like that that might make you go crazy. And then the other thing is that this is a clickable element and I don't have a pointer cursor.
Questions over here?
Let's do questions at the end, and I can circle back to this. There's no cursor. Like, I want the little pointer finger to tell you that you can click on it, right? I did read up that there is a way to do this, but it's kind of a big pain in the butt, and I have to believe they're going to figure out a better way to do it. It seemed like this global change, and everything has to be wrapped in a cursor widget that changes the style, and it just seemed like overkill. So we'll see if that changes. Plugin system is not robust yet. So one of my best examples would be local storage. And they just fixed this recently, but I'm still going to use it as an example because it's really easy to understand. So local storage clearly has hardware dependencies, right? We're talking about storing files on the device. So there's a package that handles that for you for mobile, but thinking that that's just going to magically translate over to the web and storing, values into the browser's local storage is not going to work. So there are packages like that are going to need to be updated to support both mobile and the web. And there's some resources, and actually need to add a resource to the list that shows you which packages are working in which platforms. Local storage did recently get updated, so that's a bad example now, but I think that's going to be happening more and more because people are going to want their packages used everywhere. So we're just still in that period. And then if you notice up here, we've got hashbang routing going on. And it's still a little bit janky because it doesn't even tell you what route I'm on. It just gives you the hash there. There is a ticket open for this in the Flutter repo because I think it's a pretty big deal. People want clean URLs. I haven't seen any updates on it, but I think they're going to get it figured out. And then performance is still a little bit laggy. I think that's the last thing they're going to be optimizing. And then last but not least, merging to master does not equal production ready. I was all excited when they announced that they were merging the fork back in. I thought, oh, that must mean that it's ready, right? And then right around the same time, they were asking for people to apply for a partnership to see about building a production web app. And so I thought, well, that's definitely got to be it. But when I started going in and working with it again, I realized it's still not there. We're not even to beta yet, so I just get a little ahead of myself. And actually on their site, they say, this release is missing features and has known performance issues, so we don't recommend it for production. Wah, wah. If you play around with Flutter for Web, though, and you discover any issues while you're in there, they're definitely always looking for people to add tickets and help surface the problems, even the little ones like the icon not being aligned in Firefox. Like, just throw it all in there, and they're working through it. Okay, so other Flutter news. This is not just about Flutter for Web. At Google I/O, there was a talk on state management. State management is a pretty hot topic when it comes to Flutter, and the Google team put their blessing on the provider package. And the provider package it's very similar to scoped model. It's basically a stateful and inherited widget combined. And basically, it's similar to scoped model in that you lift state up and then provide it down to the children who are listening to it. But provider does a couple things that are great. It helps you clean up after yourself. It's got dispose methods everywhere. It offers a multi-provider, which allows you to provide multiple things at once. So you're not, if you've used a provider, a similar scoped model, you might end up with like scoped model, scoped model, scoped model, scoped model in your widget tree, and it gets kind of messy. This helps clean that up because you can provide all 3 things, 4 things, whatever, at one time. And you can provide anything. You can provide change notifiers, you can provide streams, and static stuff even. So super flexible and not hard to implement at all. There are some new widgets. The reorderable list view widget is pretty cool. So if you have a list of items and you want the user to be able to rearrange the order, just throw a reorderable list view in there. The only difference from a list view is that it's got this on reorder method here, callback. And what you need to do is create, here I am just creating my children. Each child has to have a key. And basically you just call set state on the reorder to update your model. Super simple. But all the animations are built in. It's pretty slick. And again, this is one where it's mentioned in a talk. I don't think they show any code in the talk though. So. Range slider is another one. There's already a slider widget in Flutter, and then they introduced the range slider. The only difference is the range slider, you have two values. So you can, like with a regular slider, you're just picking one value with the thumb. And with the range slider, you've got two. So you can say I have a min of 10 and a max of 20, whatever, if you want people to select a range. This is pretty simple. The range slider itself is stateless, so you do have to wrap it in a stateful widget. And basically you just have to provide it some range values. In this case, I have 0 to 10. And there's a min and a max, and divisions are the number of units in between the min and the max, so I'm specifying 10. So that you'll get the little tick marks across there. And then on changed, you just need to update state with the values. You're good. That's why you need the stateful widget. And then expanding search, I'm not going to go into this because it's quite a bit more in depth, and they actually go into it in depth really well in this talk at minute 8:35, so I highly recommend looking at that. But expanding search is pretty cool. It's basically type ahead search, where as the user's typing, you can offer up a list of suggestions based on that, and then you can also provide a different way of displaying results for the search. So if you want, in their example, I think I have this right. In their example, the type ahead list is a list of text. So they're trying to guess what you obviously have to hook this up, but you're trying to guess what the user's trying to type, right? And then you can specify that the search results, when they're actually done and they hit return or whatever, the actual search results might be a grid of images. So you can be really flexible in how you're interacting with the user, providing them with the info. And basically, this is a class that extends search delegate. And like I said, it gets kind of deep in there. So I recommend just watching the video. The accessibility semantics label is new and pretty important if you're worried about users that have screen readers, and you should be worried about users who have screen readers. In this case, there are a number of widgets that now have semantic labels added. For this, we've got text that says 50 miles per hour, but a screen reader would normally read that as 50 mph, and we really want the screen reader to read 50 miles per hour. So go ahead and throw the semantic label on there. That's all it takes, super easy. Icons are another place where semantic labels are really handy. In this case, I've got these arrows all over the place, and I can use a semantic label for previous slide or next slide, whatever, and the screen reader will read that. If you have a widget, a custom widget, or any widget that doesn't have the semantic label, it's super easy. You can just wrap a semantics widget around it, and then you magically get your label. Super flexible. On the right here, we have a row. And in this case, we've wrapped two widgets with semantics widgets. We've got our labels, but we also have this sort key. And this comes in handy when your UI looks different, the order of it looks different, or you want it to seem different than what you're seeing in the code. So in this case, we have a second item first and a first item second. And we don't want, if you don't put the sort key in here, then the screen reader is going to read from the top down. So it would read second item and then it would read first item. But we want to switch it. So you can put the ordinal sort key on there and it will then go, where's my ordinal sort key 1? Here we go. I'm going to read first item. Then I'm going to read second item. And this could happen if you've got like a zigzag pattern with icons or something like that, and you really want it to be reading top down instead of left right. It just depends on like your rows and your columns. They also added dark theme support. So this is a setting in your Material app that if the user has, and also this is only for Android, if the user has specified in Android that they prefer dark themes, then your app will just automatically pick up the dark theme that you have specified, which is pretty slick. They're also working on it for iOS. And then the big news today that came out in Flutterland is that the Flutter Interact conference, it's a new conference, is happening December 11th in New York City. And that's supposed to be about all things Flutter UI. They did a bunch of hinting about it on Twitter. It's pretty fun following along. All right, so we've got some updates to Dart, the language. First one is the spread operator. This is pretty simple. It's just a nice shortcut for adding collections to other collections. In this case, a list into another list. So we've got list with values 1, 2, 3, and then list 2 wants to insert those values into it. So we've got list 2, which is now going to result in the value 0, 1, 2, 3 when you use the spread operator. This is in other languages. Pretty nice to have it in Dart. If you're worried about that list that you're inserting, if it might be null, then you want to use the null aware. Just throw that question mark in there. Pretty simple. This one, collection if and for, really helps solve some pain points. So this is a little before and after code for you. In this case, we've got a widget on the left. We'll go through the before first. We have a widget on the left. I don't know what it is when I glance at it. I don't know what I'm returning right away. I have to read through it and sort of compile it in my mind. What am I compiling? I've got a list. It's got an element, a widget of text contents. Okay. Then I've got a page, an if statement. If the page is not the last page, then go ahead and add to that list text next. We're building like a table of contents or something is what this looks like. Then I've got a list of sections, and for each section, I want to add the chapters. So I'm going to go back to the list, and I'm going to add the chapters. Okay, so I've got contents, I've got next, I've got chapters, cool. Then, okay, I've got one more item I'm going to add to the list, which is index. Okay, now I've got this list. What am I doing with it? Oh, I'm returning a column with children items. That was not really the most fun way to build something. The example on the right is much more succinct. It's more declarative. It's a lot easier to understand. I'm building a widget. I'm returning a column. Cool, I already know what I'm looking at. I'm returning a column and I've got some children. What's it going to do? I've got text contents is the first item. Boom, there it is. Second item. If page does not equal pages.last, add the text next. That's my second item. Easy, cool. Then we can throw the for loop in there. It's basically allowing us to add the ifs and the fors directly into the list literal. And then here we go with the spread operator. I'm flattening out the section chapters, throwing that right into my list, and then I've got the last item. So this is basically UI as code. It makes it a lot easier to see the UI as we're looking at it. We don't have to compile it over here and then see, oh, it's a column. Okay, they recently added, this was just in 1.9, I think, Flutter 1.9 Dart 2.5, I think. The new error messages, if you've ever dealt with Flutter error messages, then this ought to make you feel much better about them. They've broken it down. You don't really have to be able to see it that well, but they've basically started by highlighting the summary in red, so it's super obvious what's the error. They've kind of grayed out some other stuff that isn't that important. We've thrown some white space in there, which makes it easier to read. And then number 3 is the nice little summary about what went wrong and how you might fix it. And then they've collapsed, you can see here 9 children. They've collapsed 9 children. This is all that junk that you're constantly scrolling past because it's not really helping you with anything. If you want to see it, go ahead and click on it, but this just makes it so much easier to see what's going on. And then in preview, developer preview, we have the machine learning code completion, which is pretty slick. This is just a little screenshot. If you've been developing with Flutter before, you know the suggestions just get dumped at you, the code completion suggestions. There's an alphabetical order. Here's a giant list of stuff that might be what you want. Don't know. But now they're using TensorFlow Lite to try to give you better suggestions. So you can see this is not in alphabetical order. It's providing you with what the most relevant options are at the top. That's in preview, not sure when it'll come out, but. And then for super advanced people, C interoperability is available. So Dart can now talk directly to C code for any like superstar native developers. You do need the Dart FFI package, which stands for Foreign Function Interface, to get that to work. And again, that's in preview. Okay, here's the fun part. My predictions for Flutter in the next couple of years. For iOS and Android, I think since that's been stable in production for a while, I think we're going to see more and more large companies start to use it. I don't think anybody's going to say, cool, let's switch over all our stuff. But they're going to say, let's build this app in Flutter. And then maybe if it works, we'll build this app in Flutter. And then they'll slowly start shifting over. We already have a ton of big names using Flutter. So I think everybody would recognize these guys. Now, not all of their stuff is in Flutter, but they've started. So I think we're going to see more of that. And then I think we're going to see full adoption for small companies and startups like Redio. It just made sense for us. We had one developer who was going to be building this thing, and I didn't want to learn 2 different languages. So it just made sense. And we didn't have the money to hire 2 different programmers either. So Flutter just made sense. And I think that'll carry on. And then the community has already gained a lot of momentum. I think it's just going to keep going. The more people hear about Flutter, the more people are playing around with it, the more they jump into the community and see how awesome it is. It's just going to keep going. And then Flutter for web, I separated these out because I think they have different challenges. I think mobile developers will love using Flutter for web. And I think that's because they don't have to learn JavaScript. I've heard so many mobile developers shy away from web development because they don't want to learn JavaScript. And this way they don't have to. They can use Dart. It's probably way more familiar to them than JavaScript would be. So I've seen them jump over to it pretty quickly and happily. So I think web devs are going to be slower to adopt Flutter because Flutter for web specifically, because they love JavaScript so much. And I think that control of like tweaking every little pixel, it's going to be hard to let go of that. And that sort of abstraction away from the end result, the HTML and CSS, is going to be kind of hard. So I think that's going to be slower. And then I'm hoping that at Flutter Interact in December, that maybe they'll be ready to announce Flutter Beta, which is just one step closer to Flutter for production. Flutter Web, I should say. All right, then resources. Flutter Dev/Web is the main documentation for Flutter for Web. The different videos that talk about some of the stuff that I brought up today that came out of Flutter.io, there's a link for that. There's a playlist for all of those on YouTube. There is a Developer Quest sample app, which is really cool. It was used in a couple of the presentations at Google I/O. It's pretty nice looking. They used Flare to do some of the animations, and it's pretty stunning. But this app was used to display, to show that it can run in mobile. It can run in Chrome OS. They had a demo there, and then it also runs in Flutter for web. So it's a good one to look at if you want to see one code base running in different platforms. It's All Widgets is a great website. This is run by the community, and it has just a list of Flutter apps. It's getting a lot bigger, and it lets you filter by what's open source. If you want to see repos and stuff like that, then you can do that. The provider package, the one I mentioned for state management, there's a link to that package. And then there's a really cool talk that was done by the Flutter developer relations folks on Flutter and Raspberry Pi. It's really fun. They hook up a Raspberry Pi and put on a crazy wig, and it lights up based on this app that they build. So check that out. And then the source code for this deck, which is obviously built for Flutter for web, and has a lot of the examples in the code in various places. That is available there, and it's also in the Meetup description. Thank you. Now I will take questions. Yeah.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, am I getting this right? If you build the app once, does that mean you can deploy it on a website and also as an app on your phone?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the idea. You write the code once, and then you can run it on the desktop, you can run it on the web, you can run it on mobile. It's just a matter of, have I optimized it properly for the different platforms? But which build command do I run? That's the vision.
Was that the primary? Okay, I think you just said it.
Yeah.
That was the vision.
Yeah. Flutter all the things.
You talked about optimizing. It still has to be optimized, but you don't have access to the HTML and things like that. So I was wondering what optimizing means in this context.
Well, for instance, the responsive stuff, you have to optimize for the specific platform that you're targeting. So for web, if you're starting with a mobile app and you want to bring it over to web, that's cool, but probably all of your screens were meant to be displayed at this size. So you're going to need to do the media query work to make sure it looks good on a larger screen. You're going to need to add things like the hover effects. We don't worry about hover on mobile because it's all touch. So you're going to need to do the mouse region widget, stuff like that.
So how do you handle different screen sizes and formats? Is it all just responsive, or can you actually say, I want it to be one layout for a particular group of sizes? And
yeah, absolutely. So you can just switch out. They actually did this in one of the demos. It was kind of a shortcut where they said, we want to go from like 2 columns to like 4 columns on a large desktop. So they had one widget that basically rendered 2 columns, and they had another widget that rendered 4 columns, and they basically just had a media query that said, hey, if the display size is larger than X, show this widget. Otherwise, show this widget. So you can start branching logic that way.
Will your code slides be part of the slide deck?
Oh, yeah, everything's in there. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So for your company, and you on your intro, you mentioned a little bit that you've dove into this since September of last year, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, Flutter. Mm-hmm.
What's your take now? Are you building this production? Do you think it's are you moving forward with this? Is this moving forward to full Flutter?
Oh yeah, we are all in. We're in production with both the iOS and Android app.
In the development cycle, are you compared to what you had done before? Is it how is it?
Well, I don't have any view on the development cycle as far as mobile app development goes, because I haven't done mobile app development before. But the thing that makes it variable are Apple and Google approving builds. That's all there is to it. But as far as like just regular development, it's just as fast.
Right.
But getting it into production, getting it out to testers, you've got to create builds, and you've got the big boys upstairs that have to approve it before it can get dispersed. Okay. So.
And despite some of the shortcomings, are you being able to do everything that you want to do the way you want to do it at this point?
Yeah, pretty much. And we're not using Flutter for web in production yet. But like I said, it's not ready. But as far as for our mobile app, we've been able to do pretty much everything that we want to do. There's some stuff, this limitation is mine, it's not the frameworks, but we're using a charts plugin, a charts package to build charts. You can imagine with workouts. We're primarily doing cycling workouts right now, and we need to show people their heart rate over time. So we're plotting things this way, and then we're showing them intervals in their workouts where you have to hit zone 2 versus zone 4 and things like that. So we need these charts to be able to do that. and we're kind of bound by what the charts package will let us do. That's the one thing that I felt a little bit constrained by. But I can go learn Flare and do it there. You can draw anything you want in Flutter. You just have to know how to plot points, really. So that's my limitation, but it's not Flutter stopping me from doing it. That's the only thing I can really think of.
Thank you.
Oh, no. I can think of one more thing. The app, the Maps plugin package for putting Google Maps in your project, that was announced earlier this year. They're working hard on it, but there are some things like we're going to need to be able to plot routes on the map, and you can't do that yet. So.
What development tools are you using?
I do all my development in Android Studio. Android Studio and VS Code, and I've done plenty in VS Code as well. Actually, I did the Flutter for web portion of this in VS Code. But those are the two biggies. Other than that, the tools that come with those IDEs that's all I need.
You do need Xcode.
Well,
can't
you
do
have
the
to have
iOS version,
Xcode
yeah.
to build. Yeah, you have to have Xcode to
There's
build.
a lot
for
of people who get
iOS.
confused about that. They're like, oh, you mean I have to have Xcode?
Yeah,
you have to have
you do.
Xcode on the Mac for it to generate the iOS version.
build, yeah. But I don't do any development there. I stay out of there as much as possible.
Have you had to write any native code at all? Because I've heard there's been some issues with packages on if you want to access physical stuff, like local storage or something like that.
Local storage I've had no problem with. I've done plenty with that. I haven't had to do any native code. You are supposed to be able to do that with it not being too big of a problem, but I haven't had much need for the local hardware on the phones, so I don't have a whole lot of experience to offer there on the pain points. Maybe this C interoperability helps with that.
It should. Do you mind if I?
No, please.
Because I wrote a couple apps using. Yeah, they've got this thing that's called. Have you done any React Native work?
No.
Because React Native's a pain in the piece. It's really kind of nice. It allows you to go back up, and any of the packages she's talking about, if there's a package like her chart package, if she doesn't like that, all the source code is right there. You
Yeah.
can take the code, because I had audio I had to do for this game I was working on, needed to record as well as play, and ran into a bug that came up with the package that if it recorded on Android, it won't play on iOS.
Mhm.
There was a really simple fix. It was like a one-line fix.
Oh yeah.
The guy who pushed the package out there didn't fix it, so I just took it, branched it, and then when you build your package, you just say, I'm using my local version of that package, and I fixed the one line of code, which